Good afternoon. For our next session, today we want to welcome Dr. Susan Grogan. She is a professor at Harding University. She was a literacy specialist at Wilbur D. Mills Education Service Cooperative. Her studies include a PhD in reading education at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, a Master's of Education in Reading from UC Santa Barbara, and an undergraduate from Eastern Washington University. She currently resides in Beebe, Arkansas. Today, we welcome Dr. Susan Grogan.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad to be here. I really would like to just talk a minute, and then I do have a PowerPoint to show you and walk through with you. I've been a reading specialist for a long time, and now I'm a university professor teaching teachers who come back for a master's to become reading specialists. And I will tell you that I've been very frustrated at times with why I couldn't reach some children. I was doing all the right things according to what everybody knew at the time. I was pulling children out. I was a reading specialist in 3 different elementary schools, 1 in California and 2 here in Jacksonville. And I would pull the children after I tested all the kindergarten and 1st grade and 2nd grade with different tests. I would figure out who was at the bottom, particularly in 1st grade, and I would pull those children to my room and I would do guided reading, I would do phonics, I would do phonemic awareness, I would do comprehension, and all of those things that we knew to do. And some children just took off and did really well with that extra time and that extra practice, but some children did not. They flatlined, and I couldn't understand what I was doing or why they weren't learning. I was able to get reading recovery training while I was a reading specialist in Jacksonville, and I learned some amazing things about following a child and watching them closely and giving them help right at the place I thought they needed it. But I still had children I could not discontinue, and I didn't understand that. I was very frustrated, but I was not doing what we know to do now. Later, when I worked at the co-op and was a literacy specialist and worked with teachers in schools in 4 counties, I was teaching all the things that we know to be true, all those, the research from the National Reading Panel about phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency and vocabulary and comprehension. I was doing that and doing it passionately and working with teachers in classrooms and bringing to them what I believed were the best practices, and including guided reading. Well, it was in 2013 when Arkansas was getting ready to pass the law about screening all school children, kindergarten through 2nd, for dyslexia, that my ears perked up and I began to want to pay attention to everything I could about how to reach children with dyslexia. And I thought maybe this was the solution to the frustration that I had had previously. And indeed it is. But when I began to hear, the PD that came out after the law was passed, that there was a new science of reading, I was very skeptical about that because I had read the research, I thought, and things were pretty much the same. It was still the big 5 components of reading, and I could not, for a while, I could not figure out, so what's different? What's better? What's something that I didn't know before that I need to know now? And so that's what I want to talk to you about. I feel like I'm the old dog that's learning new tricks. And you may feel the same way if you've been in the business for a while, or even if you've taught for a year and you're not sure what's going on and why you're not reaching some children. So let me just kind of tell you what I've learned, and maybe that will be helpful to you. All right, I'm going to try to flick on my PowerPoint, and hopefully you will be able to see that. All right, so let's see. All right, so like I said before, these particular things have not changed. The big 5 for the components of reading. They have not changed. And we're still teaching these passionately, but what's different? What's different? The science of reading research that I find that's different is the brain research. The brain research on how we learn to read and what's going on in our brain. And I think that's when I turned the page in my own learning. And it began with the study about dyslexia. And I learned that there's a lot going on in the brain, in the minds of children with dyslexia, and in the minds of the average learner. And it turns out there's a lot going on the right side and the left side of the brain. And it turns out that dyslexic children are processing first on the right side of the brain instead of the left, where the average learner processes speech and language and word forms and all of the places in our brain that tend to light up under an fMRI scan. Those things weren't lighting up for children with dyslexia. And what we began to know is that there's nothing broken, there's nothing wrong, it's just different wiring. If you look at this slide, I know it looks pretty goofy, but if you will take the top two sections of brain and fold them backwards, you can imagine what's on the left side and then what's on the right side. And if you fold them backwards, the front of the brain will be toward you. And in the normal reader or the average learner, those children are having areas in their brain on the left side that light up and show activation when they're reading, and just a little bit on the right side. But if you look at the brain sections on the bottom row and you fold them backwards, you're going to see much more activation on the right side of the brain than you do on the left. Much more activation on the right side. Now, if you recall what you know about left and right side, and we're not sticking to the old left brain, right brain business anymore, but on the right side is where we process a lot of creativity. And it turns out that dyslexics can be some of the best artists and musicians and architects, designers. They are very gifted as far as being able to think in pictures or to think in 3D, unlike the rest of us who tend to think in 2D. There are many things that they do much better than we do. But reading and writing and spelling are not those things. It is an inefficient system for reading when you're processing mostly on the right side and not having many connections to the left side. So that is a problem. Oops. So when we dive into brain research, we know that the gray matter, which is what you would normally see in an autopsy or what you normally see in pictures of brains, this is where pretty much all of that stuff resides. All of that stuff resides. So
Dr. Grogan?
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we are not seeing your screen.
I'm so sorry. Hang on. I'll do something about it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just didn't want you to continue without participants being able to see what you're referring to.
Absolutely. And I'm getting just a minute.
There you are.
Okay.
Now,
let me try this again.
That's it. I see it now.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go back and look at this slide. This is the one I was talking about where you take the top row and you fold it backwards, and you'll see that the normal reader or the average learner is processing print and language and speech on the left side of the brain. The bottom row shows the brain activation areas in a person with reading difficulties, primarily dyslexia. If you fold that brain backwards, you'll see that it's activated mostly on the right side and not so much on the left side. And that's what makes it inefficient, because our speech, our language, our print areas are, in the average learner, are on the left side. And if you are totally confused by now, that's okay. We'll keep on going. So here's the gray matter. This is what we are very familiar with in the brain, where we know that those areas are found that will be activated. But this is the coolest slide. This is, these are the connections. These are the paths of connection, and they are all over the place in your mind. Everything that you do, you see, you understand, travels through these paths, millions of nerve fibers. There aren't as many going to the left side from the right side in a dyslexic brain. And so we have to build them. And that's what happens. When we learn any new skill, a motor skill or a print skill, etc., we build new connections. And the more we practice it, the more we do it, the stronger and better those connections become. And that is terribly important when we think about how do we help children who really struggle to read and write and spell. We need to build and strengthen connections from the right side to the left side processing areas that have not been strengthened before. All right, so all of you have seen this diagram of Scarborough's rope about what needs to be in place for a person to become a skilled reader. And I want you to look at the top left under language comprehension. I think all of us would agree that for a reader to understand what they're reading, they have to have enough background knowledge about the world and about things and about people to be able to connect with what they're reading. They also have to have enough vocabulary to be able to recognize the words when they decode them and to understand what those words mean. I worked with a child who was a little Hispanic boy in first grade who I did the best I could with him, and I couldn't get him past a level 6 in leveled readers. Well, he didn't have enough English vocabulary to go any farther. And he was not, was retained in first grade, did first grade all over again. And the next year, I wasn't there, but this reading specialist was not able to get him past a level 6. I wish I knew then what I know now, and I would have done things differently with him. He ended up in special education, which at the time was the only help he could get. But enough English vocabulary is important, and we build vocabulary, as you know, from listening to adults, from mostly from wide reading or lots and lots of reading done aloud for us. We pick up our vocabulary that way. The next one is something I haven't paid a lot of attention to. It's kind of been underground, and that is the language structures of English, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the alphabetic principles, the morphology of parts of words, the syntax, the order of words in sentences, the semantics of the implied meanings of phrases and words, and the pragmatics. The pragmatics are the practical use of language in different situations. All of those things need to be taught, as well as phonemic awareness and phonics. Verbal reasoning comes with thinking and being led to think more deeply and to be able to figure things out based on verbal or print cues. And then literacy knowledge is just pretty much, what do you know about books? What do you know about text? All those concepts of print that we teach children at such a young age. All of those things are important for language comprehension to be together. And without big parts of those pieces of language comprehension, we're going to have struggles. Now, at the bottom, of course, we've got to have word recognition, and it starts with phonological awareness and builds to phonemic awareness. We have to teach kids how to decode and encode, write and spell. And there are some words we know by sight, and they don't follow phonetic rules, and you all know about those. So those things together are woven into being a skilled reader. So I love this picture. So let's just talk about the pieces of the decoding that we really have to emphasize. Now, y'all, I know that you have taught phonological awareness lessons and phonemic awareness lessons. I know you've taught that. I've taught that. But what we haven't done as well is teach these things to mastery for every kid. Yes, we all have had the phonemic awareness curriculum, and we've taught it, and we've taught a different lesson every day, and we've to try and keep it interesting. And for the average learner, pretty much they pick it up, and some kids just do it intuitively, but some kids do not. Some kids really need a lot more than you can imagine, a lot of practice, but they can learn these sounds, these little sounds in our speech. And for the kids who are struggling, you're going to find that they are missing some of this. So you know all about how we start with the biggest chunks of speech to help children be able to get to the part where they can know all the individual sounds in words. So we start with big chunks like rhymes, hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. Kids can pay attention to those big chunks at the end of a line that sound the same. And we do that a lot in preschool and in kindergarten with nursery rhymes. And also we do silly things with alliteration where we say strings of words that begin with the same sound. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, and children pay attention to those things. So those are pretty large parts of our speech. And then we get them to pay attention to how many words they are saying in a stream of speech. I love my mom. Those are 4 different words. And sometimes you'll see teachers touch parts of their body to show or count on their fingers how many words they've just said in a sentence. And when we get pretty good with that, then we move to syllables. How many syllables can you hear in a word? And often we do this with children's names. Sally, we clap syllables. Jennifer, Jason. We teach children to listen for more than one part in a word, the syllables. And then we get them to listen for what the beginning sound is and then the chunk that follows. For instance, cat is k, at, right? Og. So they hear that first sound and then the chunk that follows. And that's getting us closer and closer to being able to hear every sound in a word. And when we get to that part, then we're at phonemic awareness and not before. So in individual phonemes, this is what it means. You think about, you work with individual sounds, first sound, last sound, middle sound, sounds for blends, sounds for digraphs, and we can put those, we can hear them, we can identify them, we can drop them out of words, we can add them, we can switch them around all orally. If you have not had very much phoneme awareness and letter knowledge, this is some research done by Joe Torgeson out of the University of Florida. This is what it looks like if you begin first grade in the lower 20% of children in phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. This is your growth prediction. This is a study of several children. I don't remember the number, But look at the difference in your ability to learn phonics. Can you put the letters to the sounds if you don't know all the sounds? Not really. That's what that shows. And then these are the kids who are having trouble reading words if they started first grade in the bottom 20% of phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. You can tell that there is a big gap in their ability to read words. So phonemic awareness is incredibly important. And I think where my mistake has been in the past has been to teach lessons, but not teach to mastery, not teach until they get it. And I just plowed through curriculum thinking I was doing my job by doing a good job of teaching those lessons, but I missed the boat. And then we get to matching letters to sounds. The alphabetic principle has two parts. One is that letters and sounds go together, or chunks of letters make different sounds. But the second part is we blend them together to make words. There are some children, especially dyslexic children, who can tell you the sound for every letter, but they can't blend them together to make a word. They haven't figured that out. One of the really good ways to help children with that is what you see on the right, the blending board with the big cards with the different beginning, middle, and ending sounds. Switching those out and having kids practice the sounds that they know and blend them together into words is really critical for helping them with their ability to decode those easy words. I want to show you this because I think this is another thing I did not do very well. I did not teach phonics until they were mastered. I did not teach the easy levels of phonics. I didn't teach all of the ways that the different vowel sounds can be represented. I did try many different types of multisensory instruction, but I should have spent more time. Should have spent more time on it until I know that they know it. I have seen children who struggle, who can get it one day and totally forget it the next day. But I thought they got it, so I pressed on. And I think a lot of us have been in that boat, that we just pressed on through our curriculum and we have figured out that they'll get it sometime or other, but they don't. I hope you're familiar with the things that you see here on the screen. I go here. This was new to me. Instead of word walls like we've done where children can copy those words and use them in their writing, words that begin with different letters, this is actually what I'm seeing in schools more, and this is a much better way to teach the sounds of our, in the the way we represent them with letters. Look at all the different ways that you can spell the long E sound, the first one on the left. Children need to know that. They need to be able to look at a card that has a double E on it and say E. I've been testing a lot of children this year for dyslexia, and I'm finding that when it comes to decoding more than the CVC words, children really struggle with these vowel representations, these what we used to call vowel teams. They need to, it shouldn't be a secret. Children should learn these. And this is part of the decoding to mastery that I totally didn't get. I taught long vowels and short vowels and blends and digraphs. And I figured by second grade, if they didn't know those, then, too bad. That's not okay. We have to give them much more than we have in the past. Here's something that, let me see if I can hide this thing. There, sorry. This is something I've learned about children with dyslexia. because they think in pictures and because they're so 3D and because they memorize pretty well, they'll take a look at that first word, bake, and instead of going b-a-k and knowing the E is silent, they memorize the word by its shape. But then when they see the word baker, it's a whole new word. They don't know what it is because they have not blended those sounds and those significant units into words. They haven't blended them by phonics principles. They memorize the shape of the word. When you get to baking, that's a whole new word too. We're not relating it back to the original word bake because we're not noticing that we're putting different parts into the words to give it different meanings. We're just memorizing by shape. That was a big aha for me. Many children with dyslexia do this so easily that they can fake us out. They can fake their way through first grade and second, but when they get to third, they hit a wall. They hit a wall because the words get much more difficult, many more multisyllabic words. Children who have not learned the rules of syllabication are lost and they start spiraling downward. Parents start getting really scared by third grade that their child is not doing well in reading, and children will begin to hear, "You're not trying hard enough. I know you know this. You knew it yesterday, or you knew it last week. You must be lazy. You're just lazy. You're not trying." And kids begin to internalize those labels and begin to have the lower and lower and lower self-esteem about themselves as learners. And honestly, that's not what's going on. It's our responsibility to understand how to teach each child to decode phonetically and teach them the patterns of the vowels and the way they're represented, and teach them about suffixes and prefixes and all the rules of syllabication so that they can break down words and decode them. So I hope that if you have never seen this before, I hope it's an aha for you too. All right, so encoding or writing and spelling. Often we have just done this with pencil and paper. And we've done worksheets, and we have demanded a lot of handwriting practice, at least in first grade. And I don't know if you know of this research, but Virginia Tech, researchers from Virginia Tech several years ago did some studies, and they learned that those little graphomotor muscles that are in our fingers that control a pencil or a pen, those little muscles develop sooner in little girls than they do in boys. And little boys have not every boy, but many boys have a hard time controlling the pen or pencil and making it do what they want it to do. And about the time those little muscles are about ready, it's second grade, and we've pretty much stopped teaching handwriting by second grade. So here's a tip. If you're a second grade teacher, even a third grade teacher, spend some time on handwriting practice. And you can just say to the boy or to the child that's really struggling with handwriting, "I know that your little hand wasn't ready, and now it is. And so we're going to practice until you can write so that I can understand it. Anyone can read what you're writing." It can be pretty pain-free. They can still do all those practice sheets for handwriting, but there's a reason for that. Now, there's also a reason for me to be showing you writing in some sand, in that we need to teach writing and representing words with letters with more variety than we have in the past. We need to think about multisensory learning because that's how our brain picks things up, and particularly those with dyslexia. We need to write in the air. We need to form letters out of wiki sticks and Play-Doh, and We need to write in sand and salt and rice. We need to put paper down on bumpy stuff so that when we write with the crayon, then we can put our hands back over it and feel the bumps. We need to trace bumpy things. You've seen sandpaper letters. We need to teach writing in ways that are brain friendly for children. And here was a big change for me. When we're teaching children to blend letters together to make words and to write those letters in sequence for the words they're trying to say in their writing, we need to also spend time with children practicing decoding in decodable books with what they have already learned. And this is where I think I missed the boat. I would teach phonics and I would teach phonemic awareness, and then I would put children in leveled readers where they were reading some words that they could decode, but often many words they could not. And the tips were to check the first letter. What do you think the sound will be for that first letter in the word? I would have them to think of what would make sense for that word in the text. And the last thing I would try would be, well, try to sound it out. That would be the last thing. Well, that was in reverse order, I think. I would put them in leveled readers in level A, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, etc. And what I think was happening was that some children with good memory were memorizing those words. We would read them and read them again, and read them again, and then they could read them fluently, and I thought we were really making progress. But when I followed them later and talked to their 3rd and 4th grade teachers, they were falling apart because they had memorized so many. But you can't memorize enough words to be able to read 3rd and 4th grade and on up words in the textbooks. So I think that the phonics instruction did not transfer to the books that they were reading. Now, I hate decodable books. I really do. I think they're boring and dull. And I don't think you can get much meaning at all from them. They're simply for the purpose of practicing decoding. And there needs to be that. But also, besides that practice in decodable books, we really got to flood them with the desire to read great books. And I'll talk about that in a minute. If you are not where you have decodable books, if your school has not bought into this and you have can't get your hands on some, then I recommend going to readinga-z.com, readinga-to-z.com, and pay for a year and download all their books, download all their decodable books, and download their level books. So one of my knee-jerk reactions to let's have them read decodable books that I heard was, oh no, we've got to teach them comprehension. We have got to teach them that. Well, I know what you can do with an interactive read aloud. I know how you can get children to go deeper and deeper into the text they've just listened to by the questions that you ask and the discussion that you promote. I know that you can help children become more critical in their thinking by leading those discussions as the teacher. So I don't think there's a risk of children not developing comprehension if they read a lot of decodable books. But the kicker is you've got to spend the time as the teacher helping them think deeply about books with a lot of meaning to them that you read. You'll read books just for fun, but you'll read plenty of books, picture books and chapter books to them that have all kinds of ways for children to connect to them and infer from them and summarize and do all of those things that we do as good readers. So I think that there's an increased emphasis on those kinds of things with an interactive read aloud that will promote the type of comprehension skills you want them to then be able to do on text. Here's just a sample of some books that lend themselves, particularly in first grade, to some deeper thinking. I know of a preschool teacher who read Little Bit by Little Bit, T.B. White's The Trumpet of the Swan. And it's very cute. It's a cute chapter book that children would not be able to read till third or fourth grade. But the story is so good. And this teacher would start with her 4 and 5-year-olds and read Little Bit by Little Bit and have the kids then, before she started reading the next day, tell what had already happened and bring, keep that summary in their mind as they were going into the next chapter. You could do that with Charlotte's Web in first grade. You can do that with The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary, or any of those chapter books that children love and have loved through the ages. You can bring to early readers who would not be able to read that text yet, and have them do the thinking on those books that you can lead them through. But we certainly have to give children lots of opportunities to choose what they want to read. We are going to have them practice in decodable books with us. We are going to do the interactive read alouds where we're going to guide their critical thinking and their comprehension development. But in our classrooms, they still need to have lots of books to be able to read on their own, or to be able to look through on their own and desire to read on their own. There's no reason to think that because we're focusing so much on mastery and phonemic awareness and phonics in decodable books, there's no reason to imagine that we would not want children to be with picture books that they love as young readers. Some schools are doing this. Some schools are doing, at least in our area, they're doing decodable books all the way through first grade. And then if they're ready in second grade, bring out the leveled books. I don't know when kids are going to be ready. You don't know either. I think that when children are able to decode pretty fluently in their decodable books, that it's time. It's time for them to begin reading text written for children for the purpose of enjoyment. So I don't know. I kind of like this idea, especially if you don't leave off the interactive read alouds where you're helping them think more deeply. If you are doing that and they're practicing in decodable books, then by the time they're ready to pick up some leveled readers, which we all like to use, then that seems very appropriate. Some schools are starting that in second grade, some later, some earlier. But I think that all of us are good judges of when children need to move ahead. We have good teacher judgment based on the behavior and the reading behaviors that we're observing in children. So we're not throwing out all the leveled readers. At least I don't think we should. But I think that we can be judicious about when we bring them in. All right, so for me, this old dog has learned some new tricks. I think that for me, what I'm seeing as different is that I need to spend, when I'm working with children and teachers the same way, more time, more practice with multisensory methods when we're teaching phonemic awareness. And when I say multisensory methods, I'm talking about using objects to count for sounds, using Elkonin boxes where we're pushing a little poker chip up into each box for each sound that we hear. There are ways that we can string beads together to blend sounds into words, or put unifix cubes together for the sounds that we hear that we blend into a word. Yes, we do teach phonemic awareness orally, and we practice it orally so that children can do all those different things with individual sounds, drop off the first sound and put in a different one to make a new word. Same thing with the last sound of the word or the middle sound of the word. I think, again, for me, I need to spend more time and more practice with multisensory methods when I'm teaching children to decode with letters. Much more practice with this, much more assessing to see if they've mastered it. Much more attention to whether they're really getting those vowels and those different representations of vowels, so that when they see them in words, they'll know how to decode them. Included with that are teaching the 6 different ways that we know of dividing syllables, or what the syllables look like. I did not do that before. I didn't spend much time at all teaching children about syllables and how they can recognize where the vowel is and what that does to that syllable. I didn't teach at all the schwa sound, which is in so many words. And I'm not alone here. I know that many of us did not teach the schwa or the syllables. We stuck to the long vowel, short vowel, digraphs, blends, decode with those things. And we've got to expand what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. Also, this was new for me, and I don't even like these books, but I do know that there's a good purpose for having children practice decoding in text in decodable books, as long as they need to. In the intervention groups, I know some of you are working with 5th graders and 6th graders who were missing phonemic awareness and missing phonics principles and need some practice in decodable books. It's not their favorite, but it helps them. It helps them advance. I've learned more about all of the language structures, all of the sounds of our language, all the symbols of our language, the morphology or the meaning of word parts and words, syntax, the order that we say them in a sentence, the semantics, what's the meaning of the same phrase that you give a different emphasis to certain words in it, like woman without man is nothing, or woman without man. Oh, I'm not even saying that right. Skip it. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the semantics are what a phrase means, what the context causes the phrase or the sentence to mean. And the pragmatics is when do you use what and what's appropriate. You could even include code switching here. And when you're teaching writing, you also are teaching code switching, because we learn to write in standard English, even though we don't talk in standard English. And then the last thing, for dyslexic readers, and goodness, I've seen a lot of them in the past 3 years, we want to do all of those things above, but with intensity, in small groups of 2 or 3 or one-on-one. These are the things that have changed for me, and this is not an exhaustive list, and there are probably things that have changed for you too. But if you've been in education for a while, you may have had some of the same doubts and skepticism that I did at first about what's different. Let me see if I can get out of this and get back to where you can see my face and we can talk. Well, just a minute. There we go, I think. Okay. Um, Thank you for being patient. This old dog does need to learn to do this technology a little more smoothly. What I was going to say is you may have had some of the same doubts about what we're doing as to whether or not this is wiser. This whole idea of the science of reading being a new thing, honestly, there are new things that you need to pay attention to. Yes. Did the big five components change? No. But the time that we spend on them and the intensity in which we do them and teaching to mastery, those things have changed for me and for all of us, and I think for the better. The information we get from brain research is just too obvious to ignore. When we know that it takes so many times for us to see a word for it and to understand its meanings and understand its meanings in different contexts, it takes all of that many times to get it into the word form area in our brain, where then after a while, all we have to do is glance at it. We know what it is. We know what it means. It's so automatic and so quick. It's milliseconds. But at first, it is not like that. At first, it does take that practice, that repetition, that boring drilling stuff that most of us do not like ourselves. For some children, that is their lifesaver. They've got to learn. And when they do, then they can read better and they can read more efficiently and they can write more efficiently. We can't cure dyslexia. It will never go away. We don't really want it to, because if you are a person with dyslexia, you have tremendous gifts that we don't have. You are able to do so many things creatively that I am not able to do. And those are things that we want to promote and we want to praise and we want to give children the options of using those skills in our classroom. Much more drawing and visual representations of what they know rather than just writing about it, and other ideas. But there are things from the new science of reading that will help us help all children, not just the ones who learn at the average rate or higher. You'll know that some gifted children are dyslexic as well, and very high IQ, but they need some different ways of learning to read, write, and spell. And I hope that you will adapt to the newness of the new science of reading and change your practice, tweak it, realize how important that phonemic awareness is to reading and writing and spelling, as well as learning the alphabetic principles. And I think we can do better with those children who have been at the bottom that we were not able to move very fast or very far. I hope that this has been a little bit helpful to you. It's probably been a review for most of you in that you probably have already heard this before, and that's okay. The more we hear it, the more we internalize it, and the more it becomes present in our practice. I thank you for listening today. I appreciate your attention. I'd be happy for you to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grogan. We appreciate you, and we really thank you for joining us for this event today. Thank you to the participants as well. We have one more session this afternoon, so stay tuned. We'll start again in about 10 minutes.